So we're here at the Future of Web Apps London 2010, and I'm here with Mr. Ryan Singer from 37 Signals. He is the lead UI designer and a product manager over at 37 Signals. And Ryan, first, you just came off stage. How do you feel?
I feel good. The response was really good.
Yeah, it was a really great talk. So what did you do before 37 Signals? Like, what's your background?
Basically, I was doing freelance web design. And I was kind of always wanting to do what 37 Signals was doing at that time, because 37 Signals was doing web design consulting at that time.
Right.
And they were like really only focused on functional things. They weren't so much about doing like, like a website for a band or a movie or something. So there wasn't the same emphasis on graphic design and pizzazz that you usually see. It was much more about like how can we do really clear messaging, and they were doing a lot of forms and stuff like that. And that was what I wanted to get into. So when we found each other, it was really like, okay, this is something that I understand.
And how did that happen? How did you start at 37 Signals?
I happened to be working at a hosting company run by a friend called Tilted Planet, and he just needed somebody in-house to help them with their own website, and then I kind of answered the phones a little bit for them, and then did some freelancing, sitting on their fast internet connection.
Right.
And 37 Signals became a client of Tilted's at that time, and I was just paying attention, and I saw that they wanted to hire someone, so I submitted something to them, and then we met, and that was pretty much it.
Very cool. Yeah. Now, you recently took a trip to Japan, and I follow you on Twitter, and you said something to the effect of like every designer should take a trip to Japan.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
It's just the attention to detail. Like every little thing, if they're handing you the credit card is like, the receipt is perfectly folded over the credit card. And it's like the exact same amount on both sides, and like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's this care to detail there. And then pretty much everywhere I went, through the hotels, the train stations, everything was really thought through. It had a little bit of, reminded me of Germany in that way. But on the one side, it was like everything was just so carefully thought through that really impressed me. And then also, they've got a great aesthetic.
Right.
We spent some time in Kyoto, and it's just a beautiful place. It's where they have all the old temples, and there's a lot of the kind of old-fashioned places where you can stay, and it's just cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So how much should a designer know about development, and in what way should they be involved with the actual coding and development of a product?
I think that the best thing is when they understand what the programmers have to do. In terms of setting up databases and stuff, they don't have to be able to do it, but they should have some understanding of the steps that the programmers have to go through. And the thing is, the UI is not just an interface between like the browser and a human. It's an interface between a human and a database.
Right.
You can't have an interface unless you can connect to both things. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't know how your interface connects to a database, what are you interfacing to? Right? The whole purpose of the thing is to pull data out and show it.
Right.
So this idea that somehow the design can be done like separate from the programming without knowledge of programming, and then the programmers kind of hook it all up, doesn't really, it's possible that you can make a version of something doing that. But then when you want to improve that, or you want to make changes, you can't see the whole system.
Right.
You can't see how there's actually a skeleton that's running through the whole thing, and all the different parts are connected. What the programmer does affects what you do, right? So the better that you can understand those connections and see how the templates are really just one category. They're just one kind of file with a whole bunch of other kind of files in the source code, and they all live together and work together. The more that you can understand that, the better you can have influence over the app. The more if you have an idea, you can make it happen. You don't have to lobby somebody else to give permission to take a programmer away. You can talk directly to a programmer, make the change yourself or whatever. So it's really empowering the more you know about it.
Cool, very cool. So obviously you were doing design before you were first introduced to Rails.
Yeah.
So how has Rails kind of changed the way that you think about design or you approach design?
I always was sort of interested in programming, and I couldn't get into it because it just seemed painful.
Right.
I had to do all the stuff I didn't want to do to get the result. And then we started working on Basecamp. And David came in at 37 Signals, and he was building it in Ruby, and Rails was kind of coming out of that. And what happened is, I designed static HTML templates. Jason also designed static HTML templates, and we would give them to David, and he would hook them up. But we just weren't satisfied by that process because it felt like it was wasting his time.
Right.
Because we knew that it was really easy for him.
Right.
And it was like kind of wasting our time because we couldn't just hook it up and see what it looked like. We had to like sit around and wait for, and David was only working like 10 hours a week at that time.
Right.
So it was like not a good use of time.
Yeah.
So we said, well, just show us how. It can't be that hard, right? And it turned out that the way that Ruby is and everything, it's not that hard. And then from then on, for a while, we had a guy at 37 Signals named Marcel, and he really taught me a lot about software development. And it turns out that the software guys have a whole history of really, really smart ideas about like how to develop an app. And the UI guys, a lot of them don't actually know much about successfully building an application. They're just in their UI box. And so the programmers have all these like best practices for like easily making changes and making the code maintainable and all this stuff, and like easily getting into the code and like how to like know what it's doing. And the designers like don't benefit from that.
Right.
The business doesn't benefit from that, except for like maybe having higher quality code. But I mean, it doesn't increase the agility of the business unless everybody involved gets those methods. Unless they all learn how to do that. So I learned a ton at that point about like, oh, okay, actually. So then the definition of my job started to change because it was like, okay, if we can do what we do in UI, what exactly the way they're doing in software, then we can really start to work well. We can work better.
Now, you recently, or 37 Signals recently came out with an iPad app called Draft. How has that kind of changed your workflow, and how did it come about in the first place?
It just seemed like a cool thing, I think. The iPad came out and we were excited about it.
Right.
Up until recently, 37 Signals didn't really have an office. We subletted a few desks at a space, but most people were remote all the time. And our main way of communicating with each other is a tool we made called Campfire, which is just group chat, and it's all text. So the problem is that sketching is a big part of our workflow, and we couldn't really sketch remotely. So iPad scratched that itch because what we could do is we made this app Draft so that we could sketch something on Draft and then it would instantly appear in the Campfire room, and then that would help us. So remotely it's still helping, but since then we've also gotten an office. So now locally in Chicago we're doing more sketching in person, and we've also been finding some new ways to sketch together remotely using things like WebEx with a pen tablet and stuff like that. So
cool, very cool.
We're still exploring the best way.
So I know this is a tricky question, but could you kind of briefly summarize your talk, or maybe give like one or two key takeaways for the people watching at home?
The talk was kind of an adventure and what's possible in 40 minutes was kind of the idea. I come to conferences and I see a lot of high value in individual things. So like, here's the new HTML5. Here's NoSQL, here is JavaScript, you know what I mean? And they're all really useful, but they're showing like all the detail about one part. And I think that the main skill that's missing in our like kind of communities as people who do this kind of work is really understanding the overview, seeing the process from all sides and understanding how all the pieces fit together. And that's kind of a specialty of ours at 37. So what I did is I basically talked through how do we look at applications from getting from an idea all the way through designing the sketch, through doing it in HTML, and then hooking it up into running code. And then also how do we look at all the different layers of the application so that when we need to make changes, a little bit more concrete about what I was saying about understanding what the programmers are doing, so that we see all these different layers of the app and we can make changes at the right layer.
Yeah, it was a really great talk. I really liked, how you just design stuff live on stage. Like usually you just see slides, but bringing in the pen tablet was really cool. So what's one of the most common mistakes you see in design, just in web apps, like just in general? Like what's something you see that goes wrong a lot?
I don't think a lot of people just aren't thinking about the problem. That's the hardest thing. Not thinking enough about the problem. So like, you see a web app, right? And it has like a certain kind of, these are the elements, and here's where the button to add a new one goes, and then here's the tabs. And then people say, well, that's what a web app is. So they make theirs look like that. And I think that there's not that many apps where I see like the messaging is really, really clear. The language is really, really clear. Their understanding of the problem that their customer has is like really, really clear. That's one thing. There are definitely good apps out there, so it's not like it doesn't exist.
Right.
But that, I think, is the main differentiator right now.
So we're at the future of web design, and I know, or future web apps, I'm sorry, and nobody likes to predict the future, but we're here. And so what would you say is next in design? Like, what do you think the next big challenge for designers is going to be over the next couple of years?
I'll tell you about something new that we're doing that I think makes sense. So we made an iPhone app for something called for one of our apps called High Rise, and it's the iPhone version. And we really like the app, but we don't internally have iPhone app developers. And we worked with an outside, a couple guys who consulted for us to build it. They don't really have time to maintain it. We don't know how to maintain it. Even if we fix a bug, it has to go through the App Store review process.
Right.
So basically, like the iPhone app platform is not totally attractive to us right now. And Android's becoming more and more important. So we started figuring out how can we do HTML5 web mobile apps. We looked into it and we found that the technology options weren't satisfying. There was nothing like Rails for doing this. Because what we want is we want all of the code to be locally on the phone in JavaScript. And then we just want the phone to hit the network to get like the data over. So what a couple of the guys are working on right now is this sort of like, it's basically like Rails, but all built out of JavaScript. And it's using CoffeeScript, which looks like Ruby. It's beautiful. And they have Sam Stevenson and Josh Peak are the two guys who are doing a lot of work on it at 37 Signals. They have a new templating language called Echo, I think it's pronounced, ECO. It looks just like Ruby templates. It's beautiful. So basically, we have a new development process for HTML5 phone apps that is a mirror image of our web development process, which we've been very happy about. So this is opening a big opportunity, and they certainly plan to open source it if it works out. If it works, it's going to be open sourced for sure. And I hope that some other people see this as an opportunity to, to do what's happening with web apps, but on the phone in a cross-platform way. That seems like something exciting.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah. The other thing that seems to be coming up is I go around and I've been talking at some conferences and I talk about like what I talk about, like not just doing Photoshop and handing it off to somebody. And the more and more I do that, the more and more the crowd splits into two halves. There's the guys who are really happy about that and the people who are not happy about that.
Right.
And what that's telling us is that there's actually like some different streams of mindsets like in our communities that kind of don't have flags to wave. You know what I mean? Like I'm the guy who thinks that everything should be Photoshop, and I'm the guy who's actually closer to a programmer, but I didn't know it. Right? And like I'm hoping that more and more we can kind of tease these apart, because I can feel it when I come to conferences like this that it's not completely clear what these different job descriptions are.
Exactly.
And web apps are going to be better. Companies who produce web apps are going to have a better time when they're able to find these designers, and there's more of them who understand the whole picture. I think there's going to be a lot of demand for that.
Thanks so much for taking the time, Ryan.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.